Indiana Jones and badass whip-swinging archaeological professor created by George Lucas, the story and adventures of Indiana Jones has captured millions of hearts around the world, becoming one of the biggest pop culture icons that came out of 1980s, spawning a streamlining of sequels, TV shows, novels, comic, toys and many more. And with that success and a concept like Indiana Jones, which screamed for a video game adaptation, which was inevitable, and it goes as early as early 80s. So hello and welcome everyone, this is Game Evolution and this is the history and evolution of Indiana Jones in video games. Indiana Jones and the Raiders of Lost Ark, released in 1982 for Atari 2600, developed and published by Atari itself. It is based on the first Indiana Jones movie of the same name, which was released a year before in 1981. The game follows the same plot as the movie here. Player controls Indy, who is in a search for the Ark of the Covenant. The game requires players to use two controllers to play the game, which could be a bit awkward given that the controllers of the Atari 2600 are not perfect by any means. Here, players' main objective is completed after acquiring the required number of items and then parachuting their way to the Ark. Critically, the game has received mostly mixed reviews from both the critics and players alike, with most complaints coming towards the confusing gameplay style, and while some critics praise the game's ambitious attempt to make a fully fledged adventure title for Atari 2600, getting an overall rating of 6 out of 10. And commercially, the game sold less than 1 million copies, which according to the producers and fans were way less than expectation, given that the movie was a blockbuster on the box office. Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, released in 1985 for the Atari Arcade System 1 and later ported over to numerous home computer systems and Nintendo Entertainment System. Developed and published by Atari Games, it is based on the second Indiana Jones movie of the same name, but this time, unlike the first game, it has more of a representation of adventures of Indy. Thanks to the new updated system it is running on. Well, at least the arcade version. Console and computer versions differ from each other based on which system it is running on. Nonetheless, the gameplay and the story of the game stays the same in all versions of the game. Speaking of it, the story of the game is directly derived from the film, where Indy is on a quest to rescue kidnapped children from a cult and recover the Sankara Stone, an ancient monument, escape the Temple of Doom and defeat the cult's leader named Mola Ram. Players take control of Indy in a side-scrolling adventure using the iconic whip as the main weapon, completing many objectives before an ultimate face-off against the final boss. And this is where game successfully recreates the iconic scene from the movie where Indy faces Mola Ram in a final face-off in a bridge where of course he won and the game ends. Upon release, game mostly received positive reviews from critics, players and fans of the film, with critics praising the game for its accurate representation of the adventures of Indy from the movie, especially the arcade version for its graphic gameplay, but also criticizing the difficulty and sound effects, getting a solid rating of 8 out of 10. Commercially, the game also performed pretty well, as the arcade version of the game was on the top 5 most sold arcade cabinets of the month throughout the year. Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, the action game, released in 1989 for numerous home computer systems. It was developed and published by Lucasfilm Games, based on the third Indiana Jones movie, and there were two more versions of the games completely different from this one, named Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, the graphic adventure and puzzle-solving game, also released for numerous home computer systems, and an NES version named Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, developed and published by Taito in 1991. The game story is taken directly from the movie, where players take control of Indy, who is on a quest to find Holy Grail, on the way finding the First Crusade shield and Henry Jones Sr., Indy's father. Upon release, the 1989 computer version of the game garnered mostly negative review from the critics, with most critics claiming that this is nothing new, just an old planned adventure game with little to do with Indiana Jones, while some critics liked the graphics and sound in the game, and NES version on the other hand had received mostly positive review from critics with an overall rating of 7 out of 10. And on the commercial side, game sold a well over 400,000 copies across all platforms. The Young Indiana Jones Chronicles, released in 1993 for NES, developed by Chris Gray Enterprise and published by Jaleco. This time, the game is based on the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles television series that used to air in early 1990s. The game follows a young Indiana Jones who is on his early years as an explorer and adventurer, with player controlling Indy on a side-scrolling platform gameplay and many level design of the game directly inspired from the show. While the game's early levels are based on some episode from the show, later part of the games features an original storyline with Indy fights through each level and defeating every boss on the way, starting from Mexico to Germany. On release, the game received mixed reviews from the critics, as many critics took a like at the game's graphic and sound. Many didn't click with the gameplay and control, getting an overall rating of 5 out of 10. Indiana Jones and the Greatest Adventure released in 1994 Super Nintendo Entertainment System or SNES, and also for Nintendo Wii in 2008 via Nintendo Virtual Console. It was developed by Factor 5 and published by JVC Musical Industries. The game is based on all 3 Indiana Jones movies, that is The Lost Ark, Temple of Doom and The Last Crusade. The story of the game is derived from all 3 movies and is told through cutscenes and text. The gameplay of the game is very similar to Super Star Wars on SNES, and side-scrolling adventure gameplay with an all 28 stages derived from the movies and with additional driving stages here and there. Using the iconic bullwhip as the main weapon, players can also use other items such as guns, which are scattered throughout the levels. The game released with a mostly positive review, with most critics praising the gameplay, controls, graphics and story of the game for being faithful to the movies, giving the game an overall rating of 8.5 out of 10. While the game doesn't have a solid sales figure, it has been estimated game has sold well over 1 million copies. Indiana Jones and the Infernal Machine released in 1999 for Microsoft Windows and Nintendo 64, and a Game Boy Color version was released in 2001. Developed and published by LucasArts, it is the first 3D Indiana Jones game originally made for the Microsoft Windows. Game was later ported to Nintendo 64 with some enhancement, and a side-scrolling version of the game was released in 2001 for the Nintendo Game Boy Color. Here, players take control of Indy and a 3D action-adventure game where the story of the game is set in 1947, right after the events of Indiana Jones and Iron Phoenix and comic book series by Dark Horse Comics. Here, Indy had to fight its way through Soviet Union in the race to recover the Babylon power source. The game features 17 levels in a fully polygonal 3D world. Upon release, the game received mostly mixed reviews from the critics, who praised the game's detailed storyline and level design and criticized mostly the control scheme of the game, getting a solid rating of 7 out of 10.
Look what I found. A machete.
Indiana Jones and the Emperor's Tomb, released in 2003 for Microsoft Windows, Xbox and Sony PlayStation 2. Developed by The Collective and published by LucasArts, the game acts as a prequel to the Temple of Doom, as the story takes place in 1935 before the events of the Temple of Doom. Here, Indy is on a quest to find the tomb of China's first emperor. Players control Indy in a fully 3D adventure using the iconic bullwhip as the main weapon, while also using various different items throughout the game, solving numerous puzzles, encountering and fighting his way through against Nazi soldiers and many types of enemies. Upon release, the game received a mixed reaction from the critics, as many critics praised the game for successfully capturing the spirit of the films, with most criticism was towards the game's camera control and graphical issue, while PC and Xbox version of the game was received better than the PS2 version, with an overall rating of 7.5 out of 10. Lego Indiana Jones The Original Adventure, released in 2008 for Microsoft Windows and numerous home consoles and handhelds. Developed by Traveler's Tales and published by LucasArts, this is a Lego-themed game based on Indiana Jones. It allows players to recreate moments from all 3 Indiana Jones movies. The game features a similar gameplay style as the Lego Star Wars games, the fighting and building its way through the story of the game, which is derived from all 3 movies but is modified for multiplayer experience. Throughout the game, players can unlock more than 100 characters, with many of them being playable in-game, which is one of the biggest features of the game. Upon release, the game received mostly positive reviews from the critics, praising the gameplay and controls and multiplayer, with an overall rating of 8.5 out of 10. And commercially, game sold well over 3 million copies across all platforms, making it the best-selling Indiana Jones title. Indiana Jones and the Staff of Kings, released in 2009 for Sony PlayStation 2, PSP, Nintendo Wii and Nintendo DS. Developed and published by LucasArts, the game focuses on Indy, who is in search for his former mentor Charles Kingston, while trying to prevent the Nazis from acquiring the Staff of Kings, which are said to be used by Moses to part the Red Sea. as players take control of Indy on a third-person mode, fighting the Nazi soldiers on various types of combat modes such as one-on-one peace fights, throwing items on the enemies, and using the whip for combat and clear the path for Indy on his adventure. Upon release, the game received mostly mixed reviews from the critics. The Wii version of the game was praised for its graphics effects, number of extras, interactive levels, and varied gameplay, but criticized the implementation of motion controls, giving the game an overall score of 5.6 out of 10.
You.
LEGO Indiana Jones 2 The Adventure Continues, released in 2009 for Microsoft Windows, PS3, PSP, Xbox 360, Nintendo Wii, and Nintendo DS. Also, an Apple Mac version was released later in 2009. Developed by Traveler's Tales and published by LucasArts, it is a sequel to the original adventure. Although the same name as the first one, it is very different in terms of gameplay and contents. This time, the story of the game is derived from all four Indiana Jones movie, with addition of a new film on the franchise named Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, which was released in 2008. The adventure continues differs from the original in many ways, mostly in terms of gameplay, this time having an open world hub of worlds where all levels are placed, and in terms of contents, the game has many additions which were not seen in the first one, such as offline level creator and adventure creator mode, changes in character abilities, etc. Upon release, the game received mostly mixed reviews from the critics, who praised the game's level designs and level creator features, but criticized its hub worlds for being confusing and lack of online play at launch, with many critics calling it inferior to the original one and scoring an overall rating of 7 out of 10. Commercially, although it doesn't have any official sales figure, but it is estimated that the game has sold more than 2 million copies across all platforms. Indiana Jones The Pinball Adventure, released in 2022 for PC, Mac, Android, and numerous home consoles. It is a collection of real pinball machine game based on Indiana Jones films, which were released in early 90s. Now in a digital form, the game contains mostly of all the pinball games that were based on the franchise. Gameplay wise, it's a pinball game with player controlling the ball movement and tries to score as high as possible. Upon release, game has been praised for being good at exactly what it was meant to be, a fun pinball game with Indiana Jones skin on top of it, with an overall rating of 7.8 out of 10. Now everyone, before we end our video, let's take a look at a quick overview of the franchise in the world of video games. So it has been 41 years since the first game was released, with latest one released in 2022. The franchise has more than 24 games released in between, while some of the ones which I have not included in the videos are not really important ones, with LEGO Indiana Jones The Original Adventure being the highest selling game in the franchise with 3 million copies sold worldwide, and also being the highest rated game in the franchise with an overall rating of 8.5 out of 10, and The Last Crusade being the lowest selling with 400,000 copies sold, and The Young Indiana Jones Chronicles being the lowest rated with an overall rating of 5 out of 10. So with that, we can conclude that when it comes to the video games, Indiana Jones has seen more downs than ups. While the films were some of the best action movies of all time, most of the video game entries in the franchise has not been great. But with the announcement of a new upcoming Indiana Jones game, one can hope for a true Indiana Jones game that will give justice to his name. Anyways, thank you everyone for watching, and I will see you guys on the next one. Till then, play your game and don't be frustrated.